wrote a long article, got it published, responding to that. And he challenged his British missionary and said, "You are wrong. We are not going to perish." And what was fascinating about that response by Tio Soga is that whereas the British missionary was talking about these Africans in the Eastern Cape, Tio Soga spoke about all Africans. And he said, "I've looked at the Africans everywhere. There's nothing which says to me we are going to perish. I've looked here at home, I've looked on the African continent, I've looked in the Americas, North and South America." And he says, "Nowhere do I see any sign of us as Africans perishing." And said, indeed, the Bible itself speaks about Africa rising. That's in the middle of the 19th century. There's a very, very interesting, very learned, very moving response by Tio Soga to an Englishman who was predicting death for his people, and Tio Soga was saying, "You are wrong." I'm telling this story to say, really, this foundation, that's where it comes from. We come from that understanding among our people, which is very, very old, that South Africa is part of the continent, South Africa is part of the African diaspora. That's part of what hurts me when I see things like Operation Dudula. It hurts. We can't position ourselves as though we're enemies of other Africans. It's not right. There are problems we've got to solve in this country, and we can't say those problems are solved by people who have migrated to South Africa. We've caused problems. But I'm saying that's where we come from. And Tio Soga was saying, rather than perishing, Africa will rise. That even the Bible was saying that. So I think that for our foundation, if I make a claim to say that's our mother and father, what Tio Soga said 175 years ago, we must also ask ourselves, what are we doing to fulfill this vision that Soga had, that Africa will rise? Because I think as we look around the continent, starting with South Africa, there is much to worry about. There's a lot to worry about. Max Botwana here, if he could come back to speak, he would talk of the traffic of people who come to the foundation every day, to talk about the problems here at home, problems on the continent, problems outside of the continent, to say, what do we do? Recognizing the fact that indeed all of us, certainly as a foundation, we have this responsibility to do this thing which Soga foresaw, that Africa will rise. 3 weeks ago we had, as was said again, we had this meeting on peace and security on the continent. And one of the things that happened, I'm giving that as an example, there were a lot of Congolese, because the situation in the Congo DRC was on the agenda. A lot of Congolese there. And we met them, and they said, many people from outside of the Congo, when they look at the Congo, they see conflict in the eastern part of the Congo, which is true. They said, what you don't see are the problems elsewhere on the Congo. And they said they believe that in order to address their own problems, they need a national dialogue. among themselves as Congolese to come together to say, these are the problems and what do we do? I'm saying that because they then said, now President Mbeki, do something about that. So they were not asking, not requesting us. They were saying, please do something. We've explained to you what the problem is in the Congo. So we've acted as they've suggested. Now I can give many instances of this. What the foundation is trying to do. Look at Sudan. And look at Sudan and you see these terrible things happening both north and south with no solution in sight. And the people come to the foundation and say, do something. I think it's our responsibility. We can't run away from that. I'm saying that we are born of the vision that Julius spoke about in the middle of the 19th century. The problem the continent has got these huge problems. South Africa has got these huge problems. They need answers. One of the things that has been very, very, very moving, very encouraging about the foundation relative to the rest of the continent is what people have spoken about. That, for instance, Kwame Nkrumah's archive is with us. It was supposed to go to England, but somebody from Ghana intervened and said, no, Nkrumah's archive cannot belong to England, it belongs to Africa. And Africa where? So it came here. President Kaunda's children said the same thing, that President Kaunda's archive must come here. So we went to Zambia. I spoke to President Malema and said, President, this is what the Kaunda children are saying, that this archive must come to South Africa. And President Malema said, I support them and tell them to come to me so that together we will work on this to make sure that Kaunda archive comes to South Africa. What I'm saying, colleagues, is you got this extraordinary response from the rest of the continent, which says this foundation belongs to them. One of the people said, I think it was Togo who said that Abdoulaye Batili from Senegal, when he came to launch this thing 15 years ago, did say that this foundation is not South African, it's African. So I'm saying I'm very, very glad to see the response from the rest of the continent. Julius Nyerera's archive and all sorts of archives, which will be accessible to us here so that they become accessible to the whole continent. So that as Africans we can say, where were we, what did we do, what were the problems, how did we solve them, where do we go tomorrow? The people who are involved in this are themselves a great source of inspiration. You know, we've got a team of 3 architects, team of 3 architects who are currently the ones who are on the job. They are led by Sumaya Valley. Sumaya Valley comes from Cape Town. A young woman, architect, qualified. And she's supported by Mabuleni Atoivo,